Truth is knowledge. Okay? So, and then of, period. Because the of just are clarifiers. So truth is just knowledge. That's it. Truth is knowledge.
Welcome, everybody, to this week's podcast. And I have with me my dear friend, Russ Barlow. And I'll tell you a little bit more about him in just a second. But this podcast that we're doing here, this is going to be section 93. And and we were talking about, this is number 35. So lesson number 35 for Come Follow Me. Again, just trying to reiterate that we are going to do a little bit of a deep dive in these sections. We don't go into all of them. That's for your own study and for your gospel doctrine class. So we are going to be doing a little bit of a deep dive into this. And let me just tell you just really quickly. So Russ and I actually got to know each other many years ago. And we were both involved with the construction industry and so forth. And anyway, long story short is we'd stay up till all kinds of hours of the night, and then go and work all day the next day. And then
It made more sense for us just to have him stay at my house.
Yeah,
because then you didn't
have
have
a hotel, because I would never be at the hotel anyway. So so it's been just a pleasure and an honor. And Russ, I just want you to know how much I appreciate you. You're literally like a brother to me. And I appreciate you for coming and doing that. Now, that said, then Russ also has been very much involved with the scientific project, which many of you know that I've been involved with as well, which is the Universal Model, with Dean Sessions and so forth. And so I wanted to give you a chance to kind of give yourself a little bit more of an introduction. We kind of had that friendship, and then I moved up here to Utah from Arizona, and he had his business going down there in Las Vegas, and then kind of grew apart a little bit. I called him up one evening to get his address, make sure I had the right address for a Christmas card or something like that, if I remember right.
Yeah.
And we got talking, and so
that conversation didn't end until like 3 in the morning again.
Yeah, we have a tendency to do that even now, but we're getting older for that, so it's a little harder to do it till 3. We can only get up maybe till like 2
midnight or 1 or 2.
Yeah. But anyway, so in that conversation, I just kind of made a comment that I would probably have never made to anybody, and just kind of fell out. And I just said, so what do you want to do? Kind of like we were talking about things, and well, what do you want to do when you grow up? Kind of thing. It's like to me, and all of a sudden he just started unraveling this whole vision of things that he wanted to do with having to do with science, and he's going to make a lab for it in his house, and he's going to take these courses and so forth, and he wanted to teach
truth.
Yeah, I said,
teach
man,
science,
that is so completely opposite of the windows and doors and all that kind of stuff. It's not opposite, but it's not in the same vein. And although I knew he was a brother, prior to this point, I mean, at that point, our lives became even more enmeshed and entwined, and to the point where, I know that I know this guy in the pre-existence,
Yeah.
So, and I hope to know him for the rest of eternity too, because he's just that kind of a person. I long to be around people like him.
We've actually had so many incredibly interesting spiritual experiences, haven't we?
Yeah.
Times that we've been on some of our trips, like we did to Mount St. Helens, and over again, we've had the Spirit just guide us and open things up, and
yeah, it's been really, really awesome. It's
been a pretty awesome thing.
Well, the reason why I wanted to have Russ come and share some information and some knowledge and wisdom. Pay attention to that. Okay.
There's a difference, right?
Yeah, there's definitely a difference there. And this is section 93, has some really interesting stuff involving science.
Yeah.
And I worked with Dean for 7 years on that natural sciences textbook project, and Russ has been working with Dean in this project for longer than 7 years. I mean, it's been many years, but he's also had some really amazing insights and things, and he's going to share with you a little bit about that. But let's just take for just a second, and you didn't really get a chance to really introduce yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. Well. I think everybody kind of has heard of, most people in your group have heard of the Universal Model. This is the second volume right here.
Yeah, this is the first
You got
one
the first
right
one over there. This is the first 2 of 3 volumes, and it represents an incredible. Yeah, there's one.
Look at the size of that thing. I mean, is that a big book or
there's
what?
like 1,600 pages right here.
Right there.
And most of it is stuff that has never really been put together in this way before, and it talks about science in a way that lines up with Section 93. And I had the blessed opportunity to work with Dean as an editor, and so not just simply checking grammar and spelling, but kind of in the process of writing this, being able to take the ideas that Dean had been blessed to come up with and then writing it in a way that reads
words.
And just read it. It's just been...
that makes sense and so forth. That's actually quite a skill to be able to do that. Well, let's go ahead and jump in here, because I know this is going to... We have... When we get together, we can talk for hours, so we got to kind of keep it pretty
and we want to get to some really cool
yeah,
things.
That's right. So Section 93 was given on May the 6th of 1833. This is, again, the Prophet Joseph Smith while they were there in Kirtland. And we're just going to kind of jump into a couple of things here. So Section 93, the first verse that I wanted to just chat just for a second about here is actually verse 1. Okay. Which says, Verily thus saith the Lord, it shall come to pass that every soul who forsaketh his sins and cometh unto me, and calleth on my name, and obeyeth my voice. So there's the three things. They forsake their sins, come to him, call on his name, and obey his voice, keep his commandments. There's 5 things there. They shall see my face and know that I am.
Yep.
And last week we talked about, a few weeks ago I should say, we talked about Moses seeing people face to face, and Joseph Smith saw that God has a face, right? The Lord has a face, but that we're going to see him if we do these 5 things. So he kind of outlines it right there. Then in verse 2 he says that and that I am the true light that lighteth every man that cometh into the world.
And what's important about that little clue right there is that's kind of like the I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you moment.
Yeah.
Because later down here in the bottom it actually tells us what is light and what light is equal to. Sort of sets up like this. This is equal to this, equal to this. So
yeah. So we're going to get into that here in just a bit. All right. And then let's see. I wanted to just touch on really quickly on verse 7. And he bore record saying, I saw his glory that he was in the beginning, before the world was. So the world definitely had a beginning point.
For sure.
And this is that he was there. The beginning, the Word was basically, and and who is the Word?
It's Christ.
It's
and the
Christ,
thing is, what's interesting too is the word actually means sound. It actually means I spoke, or the voice. So knowing that this is actually part of that process of creation, is he's commanding elements, and then the elements are obeying the sound of his voice. Not quite the way we hear sound, because we've been designed to hear sound in this environment.
Sound, yeah.
But the word that he speaks is an important part to understand.
Sometimes they talk about how somebody tells you something and it penetrates your heart.
Yeah.
Okay.
This penetrates the atoms in the universe.
Yeah, it's basically able to transfer understanding or knowledge or information, not just audibly, but also just through the spirit, through your spirit. The spirit understanding all of a sudden something happening there. Maybe is that a good way to kind of... Well, I mean, it's not a good way to explain it, but it is a way to kind of touch on it at least.
It's also important to understand, too, is that the earth itself is the fulfilling of a covenant. God makes a promise to us in this premortal life that he will give us this opportunity to gain our own immortality. So that's his business, is to bring to pass the immortality and eternal life of man, right? That's his business.
Right.
So if we want to be engaged in our Father's business... It's just a family business. That's what we do, right? And didn't Christ give us the clue? And he says, wish ye not that I be about my Father's business, he says to his mom and dad.
Yeah.
And that's the clue for us. Should we not be about our Father's business? Yeah. That's our goal.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so verse 8 says, Therefore in the beginning the Word was, for he was the Word, even the messenger of salvation. Verse 9, the light and the Redeemer of the world, the Spirit of truth. I just love that. Who came into the world, because the world was made by him, and in him was the life of men and the light of men. So I just wanted to just touch a couple of things on this. The Spirit of truth. One of the interesting things that I found when I was about 16, 17 years old and got my patriarchal blessing, and the one word that stood out in my patriarchal blessing more than any other word is the word truth. It's in there 14 times in my patriarchal blessing. It's in there almost more than like the is and the, you know, in there. It's in there so many times. But being able to discern truth and being led to those who are seeking after truth, and all these different kinds of ways that truth can be had. And so this to me is it's a special thing, the spirit of truth. And the light basically testifies of truth. And this chapter is one of the famous scriptures in regard to truth. What is truth? And it actually has a definition of truth, and we're going to get into that and do a deep dive on that. If you guys are ready for that, you better be strapped in, because this is going to be pretty fun. Okay, but basically the Spirit of truth, who came into the world because the world was made by him, and in him was the life of men and the light of men. And in verse 10, the worlds were made by him, men were made by him, all things were made by him, and through him and of him. So why there's all these distinctions? So first off, the worlds were made by him. So does that mean that he basically, there was nothing, and then all of a sudden he made the infinitesimal, and then that infinitesimal began to expand into a rapid form?
Oh, like a Big Bang.
The Big Bang, right? The
yeah.
Big Bang, right, and so forth.
Or not.
Or was that hocus pocus?
Well, I think like President Nelson said, did something like this start from a Big Bang?
Yeah, exactly.
He did a good job with that one.
Yeah.
So,
but he said the worlds were made by him. I don't think that he's talking about the elements of the world. He's talking about he took the elements that existed in the universe, basically intelligences, or there's the saying that Joseph Smith said that matter cannot be created or destroyed. So therefore, the matter itself has always existed, but he took it and organized it into this world as we know it.
he actually says that in this section about matter. It's like
Yes.
when you build a house, you're working on a house right now, you build this house, you're not actually making the atoms that make the wood. You're just taking all the raw materials, organizing it in such a way as to create a domicile that you're going to live in. And all he did is create a domicile upon which we get to live as mortal bodies, as human beings.
But he was the one that did that. He organized it.
Yes.
He got, I know, for example, a general contractor on a house. I mean, he didn't go out there and pound every nail. He didn't grow the trees. He didn't make the concrete. He didn't make the electrical wire and all the other kind of stuff and the equipment that goes into a house. But he knew other people who did, who does.
See, that's an
all that kind of work.
Yeah, that's
and
an
he
important
organized and kind of put it like a symphony almost. He had the right people come in at the right time to do the right things, because you can't pour a foundation after you have a roof. That can't happen. It has to be done systematically and orderly in a way that actually one thing works upon another, and to build it. So the earth had to be done the same way.
I like that you used the word symphony, because throughout the creation, many people who have testified of the creation, like Kepler talked about the symphony, or I think it was Copernicus wrote the Symphony of the Spheres, and either one of the two of those did. But animals, plants, everything has a song. Even the planets themselves today still have a song, a sound, a vibration. But you make an interesting point about the contractor not doing it all. And when God says, he says the worlds were made by him, some get the idea that he was just all alone up there, just kind of swirling stuff around and making stuff. But what he was really doing is actually gathering us together, and we were involved in that process. All of us had an opportunity to be involved in that. To what degree, that isn't made clear. But we were there.
There was two processes too. I mean, there was the
spiritual process was all part of this learning to prepare for what was coming. And that preparation eventually is what led to the division. And you could say the progressive voice in heaven, like, there was never really two plans. There was one plan. And then there was a new voice that came and said, well, let's just do it this way. We don't have to follow that path. There's a new way. We can rewrite history. We can rewrite it that will favor us. So.
Yeah. And that was not a good plan.
No.
And actually the whole thing was a lie from the beginning. And I know that's one of the things that we've talked about in the past, Russ, and that is that, in the beginning you have, Adam and Eve there in the Garden of Eden, and then you have the old serpent, Satan. He comes, and what does he tell them?
Well, first thing he offers them is the lie, right?
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about. We had this conversation in the past, and I just wanted to how do you say, if we can, read just.
So we're talking about knowledge and wisdom at this point?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So here we are. The fruit of the tree that Adam and Eve were told to partake of was the fruit of the tree of knowledge. And then we add this clarifier of good and evil, so it's sort of like we say it and then we forget what it really is. But it's the tree of knowledge. And so...
And by the way, where does all knowledge come from?
All knowledge comes from God.
And who has all knowledge?
God has all knowledge, and he says in 2 Nephi, he says, all things are done in the wisdom of him who knoweth all things. But in this section right here, we're going to actually read where you learn grace upon grace. Christ did it, we did it even. That
we have to do it.
We have to do this process of learning grace. And by learning the knowledge, and what's interesting also is that we can learn this by reading in Moses chapter 1, that wisdom is actually the Lord's. And he says, wisdom is in me, and he'll decide when to give wisdom. So wisdom and knowledge are separate. The tree of knowledge is what Adam and Eve are going to partake of that will cause the fall. But the lie, you want to tell the lie?
Well, I was going to just reiterate that there is a difference between wisdom and knowledge.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things that came out of the Universal Model Project is that we were talking about this with Dean and I and others, and what is the difference between wisdom and knowledge? Most of the time, the world will tell you that wisdom is simply applied knowledge. You just take the knowledge and you apply it. But actually, it comes down to even more simple than that, and it comes down to the kind of questions that we ask.
And that's such an important thing that in all of our workbooks, and these workbooks, we have 3 of them now, one's just barely coming out, all of them are based on the idea that in the front part of the book, it always reiterates what truth is, how to question, how to find truth, and what the difference between knowledge and wisdom. And that's important because you have to ask the right questions.
Right. So what is that?
Those questions. If we
There's
break
really
those
only
down,
6 questions you can even ask.
Yeah. Who,
right?
what, why, when, where, and how.
Yeah.
And so if you divide them,
if there's some way to distinguish those 6 questions, and are they all the same? Are they different? What is the result of each kind of question?
So there are 4 tangible questions.
Yeah.
Who, what, where, when.
And that information will give you data. It gives you facts. It gives you knowledge. Right. Okay. But the other 2 are a little bit different.
How and why.
Yeah.
They're intangible because they will give you the wisdom of what this knowledge is for, what it's about.
Or the interpretation of the data. So once you know who, what, where, and why, or who's, what, where, and
you need
when,
person, place, time, and thing.
Yeah. And once you get that, then the how and the why attempts to explain what the data means.
And that's what gives us comprehension. So over here we have this
That's
knowledge, right? Mm-hmm. And so we gain this knowledge. And the good example is when Nephi is told by the Lord, I'm going to have you build a ship that nobody's ever built before, not by the manner of men. What's the first question Nephi asks? He doesn't ask, how am I supposed to build this, Lord?
He goes, where should I go to get ore?
Where do I go? He asks a knowledge question of where to go get the ore. Yeah. So we need to kind of
He didn't ask, how do I change ore into tools?
Right.
We
have to change the way we think and ask these questions, even when we're studying scriptures and when we're out. We have to think, how do we gain the knowledge? Because if we gain the knowledge, then the Lord will give us wisdom.
So as you read the scriptures, brothers and sisters, I suggest this is one way that I like to do it myself personally, and that is to read a passage or a verse or just the whole chapter. It doesn't matter how big it is, but basically just take some idea or that area and say, okay, who's speaking here? When are they saying this? Where are they at? So when you go through those kind of things, sometimes it's not that clear as to what all the data is. So this is what's going on. Okay.
Ask about the who.
Yeah.
And where.
Who, what, where, and when.
And the when and the.
And then it helps you to understand more clearly, why are they saying this? What is the purpose? And how are they expressing themselves, or how are they explaining this? And so once you understand that, you can separate those 2 out, and you have to understand that without knowledge, there is no ability to get wisdom, because you have to have some data first before you can even interpolate the data.
That's right.
So you have to have knowledge first, and then you get the wisdom.
That's the whole point about being on the earth.
So that's why the tree of life is important, right, the tree of knowledge.
Get the knowledge.
So and what was this knowledge?
Get the knowledge, and then you go get the tree of life, and if you got the tree of life without the knowledge, then you're forever, you don't know.
So why was it the tree of knowledge was one of the first things?
Well, it's interesting is that when Satan, he wants to corrupt. So first thing he offers Adam when he comes says, here, have the fruit of this tree. He doesn't actually refer to it as tree of knowledge. He says, you need to eat the fruit of that tree. Yeah. It will make you wise. See, the deception is he wants you to have wisdom without knowledge. That's the deception.
Partake of the fruit of the studying and the coming to an understanding of the knowledge. Basically.
Thinking that Satan is offering you wisdom. That's he's offering wisdom when it's only God that can give wisdom. Yeah. And Adam says no, so he goes and offers the exact same thing to Eve. He says to Eve, this will give you wisdom. This will give you wisdom.
Make you wise.
It'll make you wise, that's right.
Yeah.
It'll make you
Which
wise.
is the same thing, yeah.
So that's the deception right there in the very beginning. The first thing is that he's deceiving by offering wisdom without knowledge. And only God can.
Because you can have a tremendous amount of knowledge and not actually still understand the how and the why. Yeah. We see that all the time in science, where we have, here's the data, they do an experiment, this is the data. I'm reminded of one kind of a funny example of that. And there was the scientist, they wanted to find out how far a frog can jump. And so he set this frog down. He has a big ruler there. And he says, "Jump, frog, jump!" And the frog jumps, and it jumped 3 feet. Then he takes it back, and then he extracts one of its legs. He cuts its leg off. He says, "Jump, frog, jump!" And the frog can only jump 2 feet. And then he does it again with another leg, and then that third leg, and then he takes the fourth leg off. He said, "Jump, frog, jump!" And the frog just sits there. And his conclusion from the experiment was, frogs with no legs can't hear.
There you go.
Because he didn't jump, when he told him to jump. So
new way of interpreting data.
So that's a way of interpreting, the data that actually is, we don't know. Obviously it's not true necessarily. The frog probably could hear, but he couldn't do anything about it. So the point basically is that, and it also kind of goes back to the old adage about figures don't lie, but liars can figure. So truth is not necessarily just a bunch of data points.
Right.
The truth may be in the data points, but it's the interpolation of the data that actually gives you the understanding and the wisdom to be able to know what is that data telling us.
It's also important to know that a correct definition of truth, and in the 1828 Webster's Dictionary, it actually had 2 of the elements of truth. Okay, but truth actually has to be true today, tomorrow, and yesterday.
Yeah, let's just go ahead and jump into that. That's actually here in verse 24 of this chapter. So there it is. It says, and truth is knowledge of things as they are.
So stop there for a minute. Let's just look. Truth is knowledge. Okay? So, and then period. Because the of just are clarifiers. So truth is just knowledge. That's it. Truth is knowledge. And then we make clarifiers to help us understand it a little bit more by saying truth is knowledge of things. Oh, okay, so it's truth is knowledge of things. So it's very clearly establishing that this is temporal, physical things that we can feel and touch. This is what we can know. And then it gives us the further clarification that truth is knowledge of things that doesn't change over time. Knowledge of things as they are right now, as they
present.
Were in the past, and as they will be
in the
future. So that truth doesn't change. If we look at the creation of the earth with those eyes, then the first thing is we go back to Genesis and we say, what are the knowledge points the data points he's given us? That the earth is formed, and it is without form and void, and God moves upon the face of the waters. Then he divides the waters from the waters to make the firmament.
Okay, should we go over that real quick, or do you want to do that right now?
We can come back to that in a minute.
We'll come back, okay. All right.
But the point is you've got all this data that he's giving us, okay? And that truth, then, we have to apply this truth as knowledge of things. That's past, present, and future. Now, we can't look back 1 billion years. We can't prove that the Big Bang didn't happen because of knowledge, because we weren't there. Mm-hmm. And so what we do is we have to take the knowledge based on faith, because faith is a hope in things that aren't seen that are true, right? Mm-hmm. And so anyway, we have to apply that faith to understand this truth that we have that will then be made whole. And if we read the scriptures in Genesis, the whole book of Genesis is all about data points. It's actually giving us knowledge. There's no wisdom questions in it. And it's interesting that it's all given in second person in the King James Version. until about this time right here. It's about Joseph Smith is translating the Bible. So he's receiving this section in the very time that he's translating the Bible, and he's actually making those things that were lost about Genesis be added back in the book of Moses, and it changes the voice from second person to first person. It's actually the Creator saying, Moses, I'm going to tell you the story, and I want you to write it down. So it's a verbatim story given to Moses about the creation by the Creator. You can't get any closer to that creation account than the Creator himself. And so that's why if we take that as knowledge from the Creator, then we can accept that that's truth of things as they were. And then things as they are what we see right now today. We go out there and we find, and what do we find when we look out into space? We find planets that are spheres that have water and everything. We even find water on the sun. It's a sphere and it has water. So we see this knowledge that is actually explained in Genesis
throughout the
whole universe.
Yeah.
And so we have to then take on faith that this truth is knowledge of things as they will be, because we can see what the Creator said, we can see what it is now in the universe, and then we accept that that truth is a hope in things that are true.
Yeah. Well, going back to the tree of knowledge and Adam and Eve and so forth there. So we just before we started this, we had a little bit of a discussion, and we were talking about the first
the element of knowledge,
infusion, right? of information.
Infusion? That's interesting, right? So
when Adam and Eve were first placed here, I mean, how much did they really know? I mean, you know, they must have had the veil to them too, because they had to basically learn. They were like little children. They knew practically nothing, apparently, from what they said. So
and at some point, and Adam, who was definitely involved in this process, it was somewhere along the way that veil was drawn so that he would have this experience, and how and what that was, we don't know exactly, but we do know that the veil was drawn. Mm-hmm. And so he's living in this kind of state of innocence here with Eve, his wife, and they're living in this state of innocence, and they end up partaking of the fruit. So the fall now has been started. And one of the first things that they're done, so if you think of it, the partaking of knowledge is equal to death. To get knowledge, they had to die. They had to step into this world of death. And to make that point super clear, the very first thing that Elohim tells Jehovah, that tells the Creator, the first thing you have to do is take the first life. The Creator that created all life is now instructed.
There had been no death
at
that point.
And so now he's instructed to take the first life, to kill one of the animals that had been created.
So Adam was to kill one of the animals?
No, the Creator, Jehovah, was to kill that animal.
Yeah.
And so never before had life happened, and now all of a sudden...
then make coats of skins.
And then make coats of skins from that animal that he had to kill, because there wasn't a Tandy leather store that he could run over to. So, right?
Yeah, that's right.
But before you can kill the animal, you have to make tools of death. I mean, you could go wring its neck, but you can't tan its hide, skin it and tan its hide. So you actually have to
without some tools.
Without tools. And so he takes Adam and he shows him how to make tools. Make stone tools, because that's what was available. But he made stone tools that were the most advanced stone tools on the planet. And that technology was lost in the flood. But those stone tools were very specifically formed tools. And he showed Adam how to kill the animal, how to skin it, how to tan its hide, how to make coats of skins that he could pass on to his children too. Mm-hmm. And then he leaves Adam with the command to offer sacrifices. And he was not eating those sacrifices, by the way. He did not consume any meat at all. He was offering the sacrifice with the instructions of how he'd been done. But he had no idea why, except, I guess, to make coats of skins. But he didn't know why. And the angel comes after many days, says to him,
Why are you offering sacrifices?
What was that question? Why? It's a wisdom question. So he asks Adam a wisdom question, and Adam says, I know not.
Yeah.
Save I've been commanded. And then the angel says to him, this is right here where you see this first endowment of knowledge. It's all made. So you've got the knowledge, and now the angel gives him the wisdom and says it is a similitude of the only begotten Son. So the first death and the coats of skins and then the sacrifice of that is kind of all put together in this first endowment of knowledge. And that's such an important thing that God has seen fit to remind us, so that every day when we put on the garment of the holy priesthood, it is representative of the coats of skins given to Adam. Not just merely skins, but the endowment of knowledge. So it truly is an endowment of knowledge.
Well, and it's not even just the endowment of understanding of how to properly, kill and skin and tan and hide and so forth, but it's also the understanding the why of, Adam wasn't told apparently why at first. Mm-hmm. Was he doing it? That's why the angel had to kind of inform him. But basically, this is talking about, essentially, this is the beginning understandings of the atonement.
That's right. And the fall.
And the fall.
The fall of death and the atonement of the similitude of that. So you literally see kind of in typecast right there the whole plan of salvation in that one little thing, that little endowment that we actually put on is representative of the plan of salvation right there. Our Father's business.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so let me see. So let's go to verse 33 for just a second. Well, let's see. I want to go to verse 33 and we'll come back for just a second. But verse 33, again, this is talking a little bit more about this. And we talked about this a few weeks ago. If you've been following these podcasts, talking about about spirit and light and the connection there and the intelligences and so forth. But this one talks about... verse 33, for man is spirit, the elements are eternal. What is eternal?
The elements themselves.
The elements are they've been there forever, which is essentially what Joseph Smith also made the claim that matter can't be created or destroyed, so it's always existed. And spirit and element, inseparably connected, receive a fullness of joy. And
inseparably connected, right?
Right. So when you take the spirit, and then you put the physical along with the spiritual part. And actually, and I've had this conversation with many different people, and in fact, in many of my presentations, I've done the same thing. I said, you know what? In the pre-existence, we were there as spirit children, right?
Right.
Spirits don't die. We were already with our Heavenly Father. So why can't we just say, hallelujah, this is perfect. We'll just stay, game over. We're just going to stay here with God. Everything's great. We'll just stay here. And
but we're missing that point.
But we have a little bit of a problem, and that is that we had to come to the earth. And what did we have to come to the earth to get? A physical body.
So that we could experience.
So we could experience all the different things down here. But also, if you look at it from even the broadest perspective, I think, is that if the reason for coming down here to this earth is to learn how to become like our Heavenly Father is, then... apparently we have to be like He is. And apparently it's not enough to have just a spirit. God would not be God if He didn't have a physical body to go along with His spirit, inseparably connected. And in the same token, we cannot become like God is without a physical body. So there's an important part of these elements, if you will. There's an important element to having elements. Okay, in our sphere, because it's only when we combine the spiritual and the physical, the spirit and the body united, and that's what it says receives a fullness of joy.
That's right. Before you move on, though, to be inseparably connected means they first have to be disconnected. Mm-hmm. So you come down as a spirit without anything. You're given a body, and that body grows together with your spirit. But then it has to be disconnected, and the reason it has to be disconnected is that things in this sphere cannot exist in heaven. They can't, because they're natural man. They're imperfect. So there has to be a connection. Mm-hmm. And then later...
the natural man dies.
The natural man dies, right? And then the spirit returns, and so, we're back to just being a spirit. Mm-hmm. Until we have that key... that the Savior, which turns the key at the very end of this creation, that brings back that natural body, except now it's a perfected body, and reunites that, and that's where
resurrected body.
That's where it's inseparably connected. So before that, it's disconnected, but now it's.
And we know when we die, it can
separately
be disconnected. But
Yeah.
so we get connected at some point, whether it's at conception or at birth or whatever. But I personally think it's probably at conception, because that makes the most sense when the chromosomes all connect and everything. But the bottom line is that this connection is such that that we can still be separated from our spirits, which is the reason why evil spirits can enter our bodies and so forth. But also, when you think about it, if these are all intelligences, and these intelligences obey God, and they obey His laws and His Spirit and so forth, right? His Word. When we have a spirit body, is that spirit body the same as our regular body? Is it made up of all these other intelligences? And if that's the case, then we have actually some level of control, if you will. And the spirits, the intelligences that make up our bodies and make up our spirits, are to some extent subject to us. If we don't get further light and knowledge, then they can't progress either. And
so it's interesting too, is that they actually their purpose is to glorify us, so that we can glorify the Creator, so that He can glorify the Father, so that you can see this glorification process all the way up. So in this little infinitesimal world of the microbes and the individual cells, 90% of the microbes that make up our bodies are not human. They're all these other symbiotic things that live together.
Biological stuff that we have in our gut and everything else, but it's way outnumbers the number of human cells that we have. Human cells are quite large in comparison with bacterium and viruses and things like that. So, it's interesting that we actually have, and without those, we would not live. With all these symbiological things that are part of us, but they're not us. They're not human per se. All right, so I'm kind of getting into a little bit of a thing there, but basically, so these elements are eternal. I like to think of it as, if we have progressed, if this whole existence is about progression, then we progressed from intelligences to spirits with a body, to then spirits and the body inseparably connected. And when you get to that level, that's basically where you're at with God, right?
Yeah.
So this has all been a huge process that's been going on, since the pre-existence.
So about 15 sections ago, clear back there in section 76, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And in section 76, it talks about the 3 degrees of glory. And it talks about, and it refers to the difference between the sun and the moon and the stars. But this is a good way, I think, of understanding what the next verse 36 here says: the glory of God is intelligence, or in other words, light and truth. So think of it this way. When you look at stars, when you go out at night and you see the stars, you have to go to the darkest site that you can go to see the stars. If you're in the city where there's a lot of light, you can see some, but you don't really.
The ambient light makes it hard to see the stars.
That's right. So if you want to see the star light, which is the lowest kingdom, you have to go to a place of darkness. You have to be in darkness, utter darkness, to be able to see that light.
Comprehend the light.
To comprehend that light. Well, as soon as a full moon is in that sky, what happens to most of the stars? You can't see their light anymore. And if you actually were looking through a telescope at the full moon, it would just blow your eyes out, and you'd see a big white spot there for the next 2 hours at night, right? And so the moon itself is so bright. We can see it, though. We can look on it with the natural eye. And that light actually washes away the light of the starlight that you could see in this lower kingdom. So seeing the light in this middle kingdom here is so bright. But when you can't look at the sun. You cannot.
If you looked at the sun, you'd be blinded.
Instantly,
the light from the sun is so powerful, it would blow your retinas out, basically, if you look through a telescope at the sun.
Yeah, so the only way you can view the sun is by putting a veil over it, a filter.
A filter, a darkening filter.
Yeah, to actually cut down. And what's kind of interesting is that the one time, or the 2 times in the day that you can actually look at the sun without protection is when it's in the very extremes, mornings and evening, because you're looking through the most amount of water. And so water itself is making it possible. And the living water, Christ talks about...
Water meaning in the atmosphere.
The atmospheric water, It's all that atmosphere. So you're seeing, more than 100 miles of atmosphere, and so it's kind of you're seeing it through this.
It's being filtered through all that, all that
So it's
atmosphere, and the water in it. Yeah, that's really interesting how you kind of explain all that. Okay, so let me see. So the elements are eternal; they've always existed, and when separated, man cannot receive a fullness of joy. So there we go. So without our bodies, we cannot receive the fullness of joy that God talks about. Then verse 35, the elements are the tabernacle of God. Yea, man is the tabernacle of God, even temples, and whatsoever temple is defiled, God shall destroy that temple. So here we have, again, another explanation as far as the elements themselves are the tabernacle of God. What is the tabernacle of God? Well, God lives in a physical world. It's a physical place. I mean, it's a plant that's nigh unto Kolob. Okay, so
right.
So he condescends basically when he comes down here to the earth, and so but there's this tabernacle of God is the tabernacle of clay, as they say.
Our tabernacle,
our bodies,
tabernacle of clay.
Yeah.
God's tabernacle is a tabernacle of elements. It's all the elements in glorification, a celestialized state.
So I think it's interesting that we have often said this. I haven't heard it as much lately. I guess maybe I'm just not as attuned to it. But I remember that our bodies are temples, right? And so this is the scripture that kind of alludes to that this tabernacle of God is our temple, and our temple has to remain pure. It has to remain holy, and it has to be virtuous, and so forth. And if it gets defiled, then we pollute the temple. Because the reason why I'm saying that is because if our bodies are made up of intelligences, then God is basically allowing us to become God-like, I guess you would say.
Yes.
Because He has told these intelligences to go and to serve you.
Yes.
Your spirit, and you've progressed to the point where you now can have that ability to essentially command the elements, so to speak. You command your arm to move here, and it moves. It goes there. You tell your eyes to move over here, and it goes there. But what happens if you defile that? Then you are also damning, if you will, all the intelligences who agree to come and be part of you.
And they will hold you accountable.
And what's interesting is that our bodies our bodies completely renew about every 7 years or something like that.
Everything, even more often than that, mostly.
Yeah, all of our cells replenish themselves about every 7 years. Some of them are a lot faster, and some of them are kind of slower. But the Russ Barlow that's sitting here right now wasn't the same Russ Barlow that I knew.
I'm a new man.
7 years ago. That's right. And as we get older, we're actually degrading. It seems like to me, myself anyway. My hair's falling out and so forth. But that's part of the human experience. But are we taking into account the fact that we are responsible to help the intelligences which work with us to help them achieve their maximum potential?
And it's not just the physical things, even though we've got the word of wisdom to help us to do things like how we should eat and what we should, exercise and things that we do here. But even more importantly, that is the spiritual things that we do for those cells. When we go to the temple, we're going to feed us spiritual things. Mm-hmm. We're not going there to exercise. We're not going there to eat. We're not going there to do things that would grow our physical body. That's a spiritual thing. And so all the spiritual food that we feed us is also spiritual food feeding our bodies. Yeah. And then when we want to give that up and we want to sit down and watch a movie that's not appropriate, what we're doing is we're inviting that spirit to infuse all of the cells in our body. Yeah. So what our eyes see have been imprinted throughout all the cells in our body. Yep,
exactly. Okay, so we got to wrap this up here pretty quick. So
slide down just a little bit though. Look at this right here where it says the glory of God is intelligent, or in other words, light and truth. So it's light and truth and glory and intelligence are all on the same line.
So light basically was defined earlier in the scriptures and so forth, and these revelations in the Doctrine and Covenants. That all light emanates from God.
Right.
It's the energy source, if you will, that basically powers the entire universe. It's the priesthood, essentially, if you want to talk about that as well. But this light and truth. So when you take the power and then you put it with truth, which is knowledge. Mm-hmm. See, now you have, they say knowledge is power. That's really true. It's true. It's a cliche, but it's actually very true. But the more knowledge you can have and you combine that with the light,
Yes.
with the inspiration to know what the truth is about things, it's so powerful that it can help you to become like our Heavenly Father is.
You know, the next one down, verse 39, it talks about the wicked one and what his purpose is. His purpose is to come and take away light and truth through disobedience. So his whole purpose is to take that away from us and give us something out, because nature abhors a vacuum, right? If you want to take out the good, then what are you going to put in place of it? Mm-hmm. Something bad. He doesn't simply take away, he replaces. Yeah. His job is to replace. Our job needs to be to replace that with truth. And what's interesting is this whole section is addressed specifically to the first president. Like it says, "Verily I say unto you, my servant Frederick G. Williams." Now he is a member of the first presidency. Joseph Smith Jr. is the president. Frederick G. Williams is a counselor, and Sidney Rigdon is his other counselor. All three of those men are listed in this section right here. And if you see what it says, "Verily I say unto you, my servant Frederick G. Williams," slide that down just a little. You're under condemnation because you've not taught your children light and truth according to the commandments. So it's not simply that we have to learn it ourselves, but we have a commandment to teach our children light and truth. And if we don't teach them, that's the reason it says right here, "The wicked one has power as yet over you, and this is the cause of your affliction." This is the cause of the afflictions in our families today, is that we won't teach light and truth because we're willing to accept what science is telling us, and we're willing to take these things and say, well, let's go ahead and read it.
Culture and so forth is telling us.
That's right. And instead of just diving into what does Scripture say, we want to say that's okay, that this is right. And so it's important. And so they're all three of these men, Sidney Rigdon, Frederick G. Williams, and the prophet Joseph Smith Jr., are actually under condemnation in the Scripture because the Lord says you need to set your house in order and teach light and truth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in fact, that's the right above that in verse 4 it says, "But I have commanded you to bring up your children in light and truth." Brothers and sisters, how are we doing? How are you doing personally? About bringing up your children in light and truth, and if you're not doing what you think you should be doing, then maybe it's a good time to focus in on that and try to make that happen better. And to bring up our children in light and truth,
right?
Knowledge and
teach them knowledge,
yeah,
and teach them how to go to the Lord for the wisdom. This is probably why one of the greatest blessings of the change in the way we do church now is that it's a church-supported, family-centered gospel study, and that's because we need to take back our families. We've got to stop farming out. And even though we might have had really great young men's presidents and young women's presidents, what happens though is we inadvertently farm our children out to somebody else to teach them the gospel. And we send our kids off to school to have somebody else give them the knowledge, right? Give them the knowledge about all the who's, what's, where's, and when's by reading these secular science books or history books or English or whatever. So we're sending them out to get knowledge from the enemy. And then even when we have an opportunity, we're just trusting that somebody else is going to give them that knowledge. Now, this is no judgment.
We can't abrogate abrogate that responsibility.
Yeah, so this is not a judgment on the great men and women who are trying to lead young women's and young men's groups of men and women, but it's on us.
They're supposed to be the support, and we're supposed to be the primary.
We need to take those back.
We've been putting all our responsibility on them instead of as parents. To a large extent. Now that's not true with all parents. I mean, there's a lot of great parents out there who are doing a great job and that need to have their a good pat on the back and say, hey, you know what, keep going. This is awesome. But there's a lot who are just kind of saying, you know what, I'm just too busy. We've got a house payment we got to make. We've got this and that and other things that we've got to do, and so we need to work all the time. And we'll just send kids off to school, and they'll get taught what we need them to know. Yeah. That's not the case. They're being taught all kinds of stuff that they, number one, don't need to know. Number two, that's not true. Number three, that destroys the family. And so there's a lot of things that are being taught out there that are just not good. Yeah. So here's the Lord basically saying, you haven't taught your children in light and truth, and that's because and it's causing you afflictions, and that's really true. Okay. So let's go back for just a second here, and we need to finish it up here. So Let's see, verse. I wanted to go to 26 here. The spirit of truth is of God. I am the spirit of truth, and John bore record of me, saying, He receiveth the fullness of truth, yea, even all truth. And no man receiveth the fullness unless he keepeth his commandments. So there's your prerequisite. That's the requirement that you have to have in order to receive further light and knowledge, is that you have to keep the commandments. And that's the basic law. I mean, that's the least law that you have to do to receive these things. But if you will do that, then you will receive all these things. He said, He that keepeth his commandments receiveth truth and light, until he is glorified in truth, and knoweth all things. He's talking about himself. This is,
right.
that God knoweth all things. So you'll go line upon line, precept upon precept, or as it says here earlier in the chapter, what was it? Grace for grace.
Yeah.
So grace upon grace, and why do you think he calls that grace? I think it's because when we say only through the grace of God did this happen, right? Mm-hmm. So we have to always go back and give. When we get further light and knowledge, who do we have to give credit to? Because we're so smart, because we figured us all out?
Never. Always.
Never.
Never. Even the Savior sets
only
the example.
Comes from the Lord. All truth comes from the Lord.
Yeah.
So you have to. So that's why I say I think it says grace for grace. He's talking about giving proper credit back to where it came from. All truth.
Even Christ sets that example when he says, "I'm only doing the will of my Father." He's pointing himself back as the example of the great patriarch, and establishing this patriarchal order. And we're so afraid of those words today sometimes, aren't we? Patriarchal order.
Yeah.
So, and but it's not.
That's true.
Not what the world's version of it is.
All right, and then let's see. And man was also in the beginning with God. Intelligence, or the light of truth, was not created or made, neither indeed can be. So this is where it's basically saying again, this stuff can't be created. It's always existed. The intelligences apparently have always existed, and light and truth helps those intelligences to become more and more progressed in their progression as they move more and more toward becoming gods.
Right.
If you think about it in kind of an odd little way, because of the fact that you have a bazillion cells in your body, and those are intelligences, you already are kind of commanding this whole army of little intelligences, okay, if you will. And if you think about just going up another couple of levels, basically you have God, who basically oversees all of these intelligences and all of the intermediary forms that they're in until they become like he is.
That's probably what he means when he says there is no kingdom in which there is no space, and there is no space in which there is no kingdom. Mm-hmm. Because there's these little kingdoms, like in your body. In fact, in our workbook here, we really approach the whole idea, the concept of symbiotic life, and we talk about the microbial biome that exists from your lips all the way through the system. And there are all of these. When we eat a carrot, we're not actually eating a carrot to live on that carrot. We're feeding the microbiome. And so we've actually got this whole entire system, a world
that
within us.
Breaks it down and then turns it into energy that can actually be utilized.
No, what it does is it provides food for the microbes.
Yeah.
So the microbes are the ones that eat it. And then the microbes they're these little machines that run around and do all, got a little airport in there and Amazon Prime, get stuff around. I don't know.
Transporting stuff into the blood cells.
They have massive transport, right?
Yeah.
And so every so often you take a bite of something and your whole body goes, "Yay, we got something good."
Yeah.
So this whole thing, it's all connected. It truly is connected from
it
our little bodies all the way to the kingdom of God.
Okay, so now I don't know. Let's see. Yeah, we are really actually out of time here, but I think that's about it. Now there was a couple of things that I wanted to just mention. You mentioned about the firmament.
Well, you're right here, and this is a good place. Slide back down to that a little bit. Go all the way down. It's truth is in a sphere in which it exists.
Okay, it's right here. As in the beginning. Okay, right here, 30.
All truth is independent in that sphere in which God has placed it to act for itself. So truth is independent. What is truth? Truth is knowledge. Okay, so that knowledge is independent in the sphere in which God has placed it. So now it's kind of, if you look at that, this is actually physical, tangible knowledge that's been placed in a sphere to act for itself as all intelligence. Okay, so one of the interesting points is if you read the creation account, the first day of creation.
Can we do that for just a second? I just want to bring this up because this is just so powerful, because it's so opposite of what our kids are all being taught.
Yes.
In school and so forth. And that's, let me see if I can get this to open up.
And while you're doing that, I'm just going to talk about the difference between the King James Version of Genesis and the story that we read in Moses. There's some slight but very important differences. Mm-hmm. On the first day, when he says that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth the earth was without form and void, and God moved upon the face of the waters, right?
Yeah, you're getting ahead of me. Get a little bit ahead.
So what I want to point out, though, is light, okay? Because yes. God says in Genesis, it just says, and God saw light, and it was good, right? But in Moses, he adds one other piece of information there. He says, I caused darkness to come upon the face of the deep. And I saw the light, and the light was good. So we have light. Light is knowledge, is glory of God stuff, right? But he says, I caused darkness to come on the face of the deep. And then he divides, and I divided the light from the dark, right? And the evening and the morning were the first day. Well, that's not the sun and the moon and the stars. There's no sun yet.
Right.
He's dividing the spirit worlds of light and dark. Remember that all things were created spiritually first. So in the spirit world, there was a spirit war. The spiritual war in heaven was fought because one of the sons of light...
It wasn't a war of death and carnage. It was a war of ideas.
It was a war of ideas. And so this war was fought because one of the sons of light, Lucifer, decided that we don't have to go by the same old ways. We can rewrite history and change it, and we can become new. And so in a way, it's a rewriting of the spiritual history of the whole
of the
plan of salvation. Yeah. And so he is cast out. In Revelations, it talks about how But
interestingly enough, I mean, his whole plan, it always sounds good. It's kind of like socialism and communism. It sounds really good. Oh, everybody's going to be saved. Nobody's going to be left behind, right? We're all going to be equally, saved.
We're all going to have the same stuff.
The problem is that his plan would have thwarted the overall goal. When you take your eye off the goal, I remember this poster. It had this beautiful picture of a beach, and it was you can see it kind of out in the distance, but in between there was this big rock cliff. It says, obstacles is what you see when you take your eye off the goal, right? So if the goal is to return and become like Heavenly Father, then Satan's plan would have never worked, because we can never learn the things that we need to learn to become knowledgeable enough that we can become like God is if someone else is making all the decisions for us.
Yeah, remember?
That's not even possible. It was a lie from the beginning, and it would never have worked. But he got a third of the hosts of heaven to go, no, that sounds good. No responsibility. We're just going to be all saved. It's all going to be good. And he'll just take care of it. I'll just abrogate my life to them, my responsibility to him. And a lot of people still do that today. That's why socialism sounds so good and communism sounds so good. Oh yeah, everybody's going to be equally. There won't be any rich or poor. It'll be all just whatever. But that's never worked out that way in any communist or socialist country. There's always going to be the super elites, and everybody else is going to be equally yoked.
Right.
Okay. Equally.
So communism is a retelling of one part of that premortal war.
All it is really is just the ongoing war in heaven that we have still going on and raging down here on the earth today. It's a war of ideas.
And that war of ideas is raging even within our own church and our own schools.
Yeah.
That things, that these ideals are changing. It's like we don't have to believe the Bible anymore because we're smarter now. We know these things.
Well, we know the earth is 4.56 billion years old, and we all came here by an evolutionary process that has caused, from slime to up to apes, and then finally to us.
So
we're just one more cog in the overall wheel. There's nothing special about us. We're just another species on the planet who happens to just be reigning on the planet right now. But in a million years from now, probably worms will be reigning on the planet because we'll be long gone and so forth. I mean, that's what happens. But the creation account, according to science, is a whole big deal. The Big Bang to everything's expanding to everything that is coalescing into individual planets and so forth, and then everything starts evolving. And anyway, Let's just go to really quickly. I want to just touch on this. So in the beginning, this is the story of the creation.
Yep.
Okay? In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. Without form. What form does water have in space when it's out there?
It has no form.
It's just kind of out there, right?
And it's empty.
And it's empty, basically. And darkness was upon the face of the deep. The deep what? Deep space? Deep what was it? Well, it actually tells us here that the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the
waters.
Water. So which was
so
first?
In fact, that part it says, when darkness on the face of the deep. In Moses, we learn that God caused that darkness. So it wasn't just there. He actually caused it to get there.
He had to actually do something to cause that darkness to happen.
Yeah.
And I think that's partially that could be just like you have to put darkness in front of a lens if you're going to look at the sun through a telescope or something like that. You have to put a darkness filter on it, right? The same kind of way you can't really perceive the light if you have too much light or too little. It's like a camera; it gets overexposed or underexposed, and then you don't get anything. It has to be the proper exposure. All right, we could go into that too, but Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, and God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters." Now, as I read that, I'm basically saying, so here's whatever this firmament thing is, and it's dividing waters from water. So here's water here, firmament in the middle. Okay.
So in our geography book, we actually go up and talk about layers, and so that's how we know that it's not necessarily the difference between ocean water and atmospheric water. That's not what they're talking about,
right? It says that God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament. So now we've got to take this and kind of split it this way. So there's waters under the firmament, there's the firmament, and there's the waters above the firmament. Okay, so there's three different things here. And then it says, verse 8, and God called the firmament heaven. So this part in the middle is heaven. And the evening and the morning was the second day. So that's the end of the second day. Okay. And God said in verse 9, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place. And what form, what shape does water have when it's gathered together into one place?
A sphere.
It's a sphere. It turns into a sphere. Now, from this point on, after verse 9, the waters above the firmament are never mentioned again in Genesis or any of the other accounts of the creation. So the firmament's mentioned as being heaven, so that's some kind of a space between where we're at, basically, with the earth being formed by water, in water, basically. God's taking the water and putting it into one sphere, okay, under the heaven to be gathered together to one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. So which came first, the water or the dry land? The water was first, and that's true actually whether it's the biblical account or there's Pearl of Great Price two accounts or the temple account. It's also the same in the Popol Vuh and other ancient histories and ancient records where they talk about all there was at the beginning was the peaceful sea.
Right.
There was just the peaceful sea, and then the dry land appeared. How does dry land appear out of water? Well, if you want to know that, you got to go to the universal model. because all of the rocks of the earth are rocks that came literally precipitated out of solution, out of water. And that's the granite, the gneiss, the schist, and other kinds of planetary rocks that make up the crust of the earth. And we can go into all that. And God called the dry land part earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. And God saw that it was good. Genesis chapter 1, that's 9 through 10. And brothers and sisters, it is really good. This planet was made specifically for us, God's children, his ultimate creation, which actually man is not his ultimate creation. It was woman. Made man first, said, now I got to tweak a couple more things, and then I got to make the woman. So then he made the woman, and the woman has the capability of having inception of life happen within her her spirit, her body, and everything.
She is a creator, literally, of life.
She can be a creator of life, yeah. And obviously, so she needs man to help with that whole process. But the bottom line is that she's the one that carries, and her body is the one that's going to nurture this new child until it's able to live on its own, outside of her protective cocoon, if you will.
So, can we do one more thing before we wrap this up?
Yeah, we better hurry.
The only thing I want to talk about is go back to day 2, and this is the firmament, okay?
Okay.
It's understanding because it's pretty easy to understand day 1, the creation, the waters. It's pretty easy to understand day 3, the dry land appearing and all that stuff. But this day 2 firmament thing is really interesting. Say that God called the firmament heaven, the evening, and the morning were the second day. So the whole second day is the creation of this firmament. Now, in section 93, it talks about the glory of God. Right?
By the way, he calls it the day. And then God tells us twice in the scriptures, in 2 Peter and also in the Q&A section there in Doctrine and Covenants in section, was it 77?
Yes.
That a day is 1,000 years on this earth. That one day to him, which is the time it takes for his planet to rotate one time on its axis, is the same amount of time that it takes for our earth to make 1,000 revolutions around our sun. Which is
so the word day is yom, which means day. And so if you were to take him literally at it, then you would take him literally that it was a 24-hour day. So there's something you have to...
24-hour of his days.
A 24-hour...
Because the earth did not exist
This is that debate, and I'm only going to leave this open for just a second.
Yeah.
Okay? Is that there's this discussion, there's still a debate among a lot of Christian theologians and even among members that believe in the creation, is 24 hours versus 1,000 years for a day. Okay? Mm-hmm. But there's some important parts here in day 2 that helps us understand that, I believe, that make it a little bit clearer. And that is, first of all, what is the firmament? And what are these things happening? And so, if we go to Psalm 19, remember what's the glory of God?
Intelligence.
Okay, the glory of God is intelligence,
or
even light and truth. Okay, so in Psalm 19 it says, the heavens declare the glory of God. So the heavens are declaring this glory, and the firmament shows his handiwork. So the firmament that he has created is this space, and this is where it says that he places these things all often in a sphere. He actually is creating this space where he can do the creation itself to show his handiwork. So all the things that we see that were created by him, the animals and the fish and the trees and the planets and the things that pertain to our ecosystem, our world, is the firmament in which he places all of this. And so what he does is he stretches out the heavens. He says, in Job, he talks about how he stretches out the heavens. In a way, we can understand that as stretching out time. So, so this it slows it down to the point where we can literally walk through the tiny things, the weeds and the rocks, and we can see every little aspect of who we are. It slows it down to the point where we can make the mistake, think through the mistake, and repent the mistake. And that entire thing, even if it takes a whole life, is this quit to the Lord. But it's slowed down.
It's like a time-lapse video.
Yeah, it's really, the heavens are the glory of God, but the firmament's where he has done his work. And that work is that he's created the mortal body of man, and he's put us in this mortal space. So the firmament itself is literally his canvas, where he's painted it for us to live and to grow and to learn. And in that one moment. And then at the end, it's going to come back. So,
wow. Well, good stuff. Russ, thank you so much for joining us here, and I hope you're enjoying this. By the way, if you're liking these podcasts, give us the thumbs up there and like it, and subscribe, and talk to your friends and neighbors and your board members and so forth, and get them to subscribe. Your family as well. When I say subscribe, basically I just hit the subscribe button on there. And Russ, tell me, so really quickly, you got a couple of things here.
Foundation. Yeah, this is a book called In the Beginning. This is the cover of the book. It's a 7-series book. It's written as a novel, and it's pretty interesting because we kind of cover that in a way that just makes it easy to read and understand. But anyway, go to True Seekers Foundation, and that's our homeschool academy. That's our adventures tours where we actually take people and connect to.
Yeah, in fact, you're going on one here pretty quick.
Yeah, a couple of them actually.
Yes,
so,
we have a couple of different ones here going on. So, yeah, so to get a hold of Russ, you can go to TrueSeekersFoundation.com, and you can get more information there. And I think we have some links to on the bookofmormonevidence.org site to your stuff. And he's been a speaker at our conferences and events. So if you are one of the subscribers to our streaming website, you can see Russ's material there as well.
Sounds good.
So so thank you so much for joining us. We will see you next time. I hope that you are finding these to be informative and doing a little bit of a deep dive in comparison with, I love talking with people who have who are thinkers, who are trying their best to receive that further light and knowledge and be willing to share it with others. So thank you so much, Russ. Love and appreciate you and Heidi and your whole family, and you're just awesome. So
and thank you all of us. Thank you for spending your time with us.
You bet. Okay, until next week. See you later.